Hi, I'm Hallie, and I need to tell you something that happened to me that I never thought would happen in a million years. What I'm about to share with you might sound like something out of a movie, but every single word of this is true. And if you've ever trusted the wrong person, if you've ever felt invisible in your own family, or if you've ever had someone steal something precious from you, then this story is going to hit you right in the heart. It was a Tuesday morning in October when my entire world fell apart with a single phone call. I was sitting in my tiny studio apartment in downtown Portland, sipping my morning coffee and scrolling through job applications on my laptop. At 34, I was trying to rebuild my life after a devastating divorce that had left me with almost nothing. My ex-husband had cleaned out our joint accounts, sold our house without telling me, and disappeared with his secretary to somewhere in Europe. I was starting over from scratch, working part-time at a local bookstore just to make ends meet. But here's where the story gets really twisted. After the divorce, my older brother Marcus offered me a place to stay. "Come live with me and Sarah," he said over the phone, his voice warm and reassuring. "Your family, Hallie. We take care of each other." Marcus had always been the golden child in our family: successful real estate agent, beautiful wife, gorgeous house in the suburbs. He seemed to have it all figured out, and I was desperate for some stability. So I packed my few remaining belongings and moved into their guest room. Marcus and his wife Sarah welcomed me with open arms, or so I thought. They said I could stay as long as I needed. That family was everything, that we were stronger together. For the first few weeks, it actually felt like a fresh start. We'd have dinner together, watch movies on weekends, and Marcus would even give me advice about getting back on my feet financially. But looking back now, I realize there were warning signs that I completely missed. Marcus would sometimes ask me seemingly innocent questions about my credit score, my social security number, my employment history. He'd say things like, "You know, sis, you've always been the responsible one. Your credit must be perfect." At the time, I thought he was just making conversation, maybe even complimenting me. I had no idea he was gathering ammunition. The phone call that changed everything came at exactly 9:47 a.m. on that Tuesday morning. I remember the time because I was looking at the clock, dreading another day of job hunting. The caller ID showed a number I didn't recognize. "Hello?" I answered, expecting another telemarketer. "Good morning, is this Hallie Richardson?" The voice was professional, friendly even. "Yes, this is she. This is Jennifer calling from Pacific Coast Mortgage. I'm reaching out regarding your upcoming payment due next Friday for your property loan. We wanted to remind you that the payment of $4,100 is scheduled to be automatically withdrawn from your account." I sat up straight, nearly spilling my coffee. "I'm sorry. There must be some mistake. I don't have any mortgage or property loan." There was a pause. "Ma'am, according to our records, you have a mortgage for $647,000 on a property in Hillsdale. The loan was originated 6 months ago. Would you like me to verify some information to confirm we're speaking with the right person?" My heart started pounding. 6 months ago? That's impossible. I was going through a divorce 6 months ago. I definitely didn't buy any property. "Let me pull up your file here," Jennifer said, and I could hear typing in the background. "I show the loan was approved based on your employment verification from Richardson Real Estate, your credit score of 780, and a substantial down payment. The property address is 2847 Maple Grove Drive in Hillsdale." I felt like I was in some kind of nightmare. "Ma'am, I need you to send me everything you have on this loan right now. There's been a serious mistake." "Of course. I'll email you a complete copy of your loan documents within the next hour." Is the email address Hallie Richardson pdx@gmail.com still current? That was my email address. How did they have my email address? Yes, that's correct. But I'm telling you, I never applied for this loan. After I hung up, my hands were shaking so badly I could barely type. I immediately logged into my credit monitoring app, something I'd been checking religiously since the divorce to make sure my ex-husband hadn't left me any surprise debts. And there it was, like a punch to the gut. A new mortgage account showing a balance of $647,000. $647,000. I stared at that number on my phone screen until my eyes started to water. That was more money than I'd ever seen in my entire life. That was more than most people make in 10 years. And somehow, my name was attached to it. The email from Pacific Coast Mortgage arrived exactly 53 minutes later. I opened it with trembling fingers, and what I saw made my stomach drop to the floor. There was my name, clear as day, on every single page. Hallie Elizabeth Richardson, my social security number, my date of birth. And there, on page 7, was a signature that looked remarkably like mine. But here's the thing about signatures. You know your own signature the way you know your own face in the mirror. And while this signature looked close, it wasn't quite right. The H in Hallie was too rounded. The loop in the R in Richardson was too wide. Someone had practiced my signature, but they hadn't perfected it. I called my bank immediately. I need to check if there have been any unusual inquiries on my credit report, I told the representative. Let me pull that up for you. Miss Richardson, she said. After a few minutes, she came back on the line. I show several inquiries from mortgage companies over the past 8 months. The most recent was from Pacific Coast Mortgage, but I also see inquiries from First National Bank, Cornerstone Lending, and Metropolitan Mortgage Group. 8 months. That meant whoever was doing this had been planning it since before my divorce was even finalized. They'd been watching, waiting, setting me up while I was at my most vulnerable. That's when a terrible thought started forming in my mind. I grabbed my laptop and did something I probably should have done months ago. I Googled Richardson Real Estate. The first result that came up made my blood run cold. Richardson Real Estate, Marcus Richardson. Licensed agent, specializing in luxury homes and investment properties in the Portland metropolitan area. Marcus had been using our family name for his business, and according to the mortgage documents, my employment verification had come from Richardson Real Estate, which meant my own brother had not only forged my signature on a mortgage application, he'd also created fake employment records to make it look like I worked for his company. I sat in my tiny studio apartment, surrounded by unpacked boxes and the few possessions I'd managed to salvage from my marriage, and I realized that the person I'd trusted most in the world had been systematically destroying my financial future while I slept in his guest room. But the really sick part? The property address on the mortgage, 2847 Maple Grove Drive in Hillsdale, that was Marcus and Sarah's house. My brother hadn't just stolen my identity to get a mortgage. He'd stolen my identity to refinance his own house, using my perfect credit score to secure a loan he never could have qualified for on his own. I drove to Hillsdale that afternoon, even though I wasn't ready for what I might find. The house at 2847 Maple Grove Drive was indeed Marcus and Sarah's house, the same house where I'd been living for the past 4 months. The same house where they'd welcomed me with open arms and promised me a safe place to rebuild my life. But now I was looking at it with different eyes. The new Tesla in the driveway that Marcus had bought, because business was so good. The expensive renovations they'd done to the kitchen and master bathroom. The weekly dinner parties where Marcus would boast about his latest real estate deals. All of it had been paid for with money borrowed against my name, my credit, my future. I sat in my car outside that house for almost 2 hours, just staring at it and trying to process what my life had become. This wasn't just about money. This was about trust. about family, about the person I thought I knew better than anyone in the world, systematically betraying me while I thanked him for his generosity. When I finally went back inside that evening, Marcus and Sarah were in the kitchen preparing dinner like nothing had happened. Marcus looked up from chopping vegetables and smiled that same warm, brotherly smile he'd been giving me my entire life. "Hey, sis, how is the job hunting today? Any luck?" I wanted to scream. I wanted to throw the mortgage documents in his face and demand answers. But something held me back. Maybe it was shock. Maybe it was fear. Or maybe some part of me still couldn't believe that my own brother, the person who'd held my hand when I was scared of the dark as a kid, who'd taught me how to ride a bike, who'd walked me down the aisle at my wedding, could do something so cruel. Instead, I just said, "Fine. Nothing concrete yet, but I'm hopeful." Sarah looked up from the stove. "Don't worry, Hallie. Something will come along. You're so talented and hardworking. Any company would be lucky to have you." The irony of her words was almost unbearable. Here she was, complimenting my work ethic. Meanwhile, she was living in a house that my credit score had paid for. That night, I lay in the guest bed staring at the ceiling, listening to Marcus and Sarah laughing at something on TV in the next room. The sound of their happiness felt like nails on a chalkboard. How could they be so relaxed, so carefree, when they knew what they'd done to me? But then I realized something even more disturbing. What if they didn't think they'd done anything wrong? What if, in their minds, they'd simply used family resources to secure a better financial future? What if they thought I should be grateful to contribute to the family's success? Even if I didn't know I was contributing? I started thinking about all the times over the years when Marcus had gotten into financial trouble and our parents had bailed him out. The time in college when he'd racked up $15,000 in credit card debt and Dad had paid it off. The time he'd lost his job and Mom had covered his rent for 6 months. The time his first business venture had failed and the whole family had chipped in to help him start over. Marcus had always been the one who needed help, and I'd always been the one who was doing fine. Even during my divorce, when I was clearly falling apart, the family narrative was that I was strong, that I was a survivor, that I'd bounce back. Nobody ever asked if I needed help because they all assumed I'd figure it out on my own. Maybe Marcus saw my good credit and stable employment history and thought, why shouldn't the family benefit from Hallie's success? She's always been the responsible one. She can handle a little extra debt. But $647,000 wasn't a little extra debt. It was more than I'd earn in 15 years working at the bookstore. It was enough to destroy my financial future completely. The next morning, I made a decision that would change everything. I was going to confront Marcus directly, show him the mortgage documents, and demand an explanation. I was done being the quiet, accommodating sister who always kept the peace. But when I walked into the kitchen with the papers in my hand, ready for battle, Marcus wasn't there. Sarah was sitting at the breakfast table with a cup of coffee and a troubled expression. "Good morning, Hallie," she said, but her voice was different, colder. "Where's Marcus?" I asked. "He had to leave early for a client meeting, but actually, I'm glad we have a chance to talk." She gestured to the chair across from her. "Please, sit down." I remained standing. "Sarah, I need to talk to Marcus about something important. When will he be back?" She studied my face for a long moment. "He told me about the mortgage." Hallie, the words hit me like a physical blow. "He told you?" "He said you'd probably figure it out eventually. You always were the smart one in the family." She took a sip of her coffee, completely calm. "Look, I know this might seem complicated, but Marcus really did this for all of us. Your credit was just sitting there, unused. You weren't buying a house. You weren't starting a business. It seemed wasteful to let such a good credit score go to waste when we could use it to secure our family's future. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Sarah, what Marcus did is called identity theft. It's a federal crime. She waved her hand dismissively. Don't be so dramatic. It's not like he stole money from strangers. We're family. What's good for Marcus and me is good for you too. This house is an investment that will benefit all of us in the long run. But I'm the one who's legally responsible for the payments. I'm the one whose credit will be destroyed if you default. We're not going to default, she said firmly. Marcus's business is doing better than ever. We can easily afford the payments. Then why didn't you just apply for the loan yourselves? For the first time, Sarah looked uncomfortable. Marcus had some credit issues from his last business venture. Nothing serious, just some late payments that made the banks nervous. But your credit is perfect. So it made sense to use your name instead. The casual way she said it made sense to use your name. Like my identity was just another family resource to be shared. Like borrowing a car or a lawnmower. I left the house that morning and drove aimlessly around Portland for hours, trying to process what had happened. My own family had betrayed me in the most fundamental way possible. They'd stolen my identity, destroyed my financial future, and then had the audacity to act like I should be grateful for the privilege of helping them commit fraud. But the worst part wasn't the money. The worst part was the realization that they'd been planning this for months, maybe even years. Every kind gesture, every moment of support, every time Marcus had called me the responsible one. It had all been leading up to this. I hadn't been a beloved sister living in their guest room. I'd been a mark. As I drove past the coffee shop where Marcus and I used to meet for lunch when I was going through my divorce, I remembered something he'd said to me just a few weeks after I'd moved in with them. We were talking about my job search, and he'd mentioned how impressive my resume was, how any employer would be lucky to have someone with my qualifications and my spotless record. At the time, I'd thought he was being encouraging. Now I realized he'd been assessing my value as a co-signer. That's when I made the second decision that would change my life forever. I wasn't just going to confront Marcus. I was going to fight back. I was going to expose what he'd done, reclaim my identity, and make sure he faced consequences for what he'd done to me. But first, I needed help. And I knew exactly who to call. My college roommate Jessica had become a paralegal at a law firm that specialized in financial crimes. We'd kept in touch over the years, and she'd always told me that if I ever needed legal advice, I should call her. Well, I'd never needed legal advice more than I did right now. Jess, it's Hallie, I said when she picked up the phone. I need your help. My brother stole my identity and took out a mortgage for almost $700,000 in my name. There was a long pause. Hallie, are you serious? Because if you are, we need to meet right now. What your brother did isn't just identity theft. It's mortgage fraud, wire fraud, and possibly racketeering if he's done this to other people. Other people? I hadn't even considered that possibility. Hallie, people who do this kind of thing rarely stop at one victim. If Marcus was willing to steal from his own sister, he's probably willing to steal from anyone. As I drove to meet Jessica, I realized that my story was probably just the beginning, and if I wanted to stop Marcus from destroying other people's lives the way he'd destroyed mine, I was going to have to be braver than I'd ever been before. Jessica's law office was located in a sleek downtown building that made me feel both hopeful and terrified at the same time. As I sat in the waiting room, clutching a manila folder full of mortgage documents, I kept replaying Sarah's words in my head. What's good for Marcus and me is good for you too. The audacity of it still took my breath away. Hallie? Jessica appeared in the doorway, and I barely recognized her. Gone was the carefree college girl who used to stay up all night eating pizza and cramming for exams. This Jessica wore a sharp business suit and had the kind of confident posture that comes from years of fighting battles in courtrooms. She led me into a conference room with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city. "Okay," she said, settling into her chair and pulling out a legal pad. "Tell me everything, and I mean everything. Don't leave out any detail, no matter how small or embarrassing it might seem." I started from the beginning: the divorce, moving in with Marcus and Sarah, the strange questions about my credit score. As I talked, Jessica took notes, occasionally stopping me to ask for clarification or to have me repeat specific dates and amounts. When I got to the part about the mortgage being for Marcus's own house, Jessica's pen stopped moving. "Wait, hold on. You're telling me that your brother used your identity to refinance his own home and then let you live there as a guest while you were unknowingly paying for his mortgage?" "That's exactly what I'm telling you." Jessica sat back in her chair and let out a low whistle. "Hallie, this is so much worse than simple identity theft. This is psychological manipulation on a level I've rarely seen. He didn't just steal your money. He made you grateful for the privilege of being robbed." She opened her laptop and started typing. "I'm going to run a comprehensive background check on Marcus and see what else we can find. In cases like this, there are usually multiple victims, multiple schemes. People who are willing to defraud their own family members don't typically stop there." While she worked, I stared out the window at the busy street below. People were going about their normal lives, grabbing coffee, heading to work, meeting friends for lunch. Just a week ago, I thought I was one of them. Now I felt like I was looking at the world from behind glass, like I was trapped in some alternate reality where the people you trust most are the ones who hurt you the worst. "Hallie," Jessica said, turning her laptop screen toward me. "Look at this." On the screen was a public record search showing Marcus's business history. But it wasn't just Richardson Real Estate. Over the past 5 years, Marcus had been involved with 6 different real estate companies, 3 of which had been shut down by the state for fraudulent practices. "And look at this," Jessica continued, clicking on another tab. "I found 4 other mortgage applications with Marcus's name on them as either the borrower or the employment verifier. 2 of them were approved. 2 were denied. But here's the interesting part. On 3 of these applications, the borrower's credit score was listed as between 750 and 800, which is excellent credit. But when I cross-referenced the borrower's names with credit reports from 3 years ago, none of them had credit scores above 650. My heart started pounding. "You think he's done this to other people?" "I think your brother has been running a systematic identity theft operation for years, and you're just the latest victim." Jessica's voice was grim. "The question is, how many other people are out there who don't even know they've been victimized?" She pulled up another screen. "Look at this mortgage from 18 months ago. The borrower is listed as David Chen, employed by Richardson Real Estate as a senior sales associate. The loan was for $520,000 for a property in Beaverton. But according to public records, David Chen is a 67-year-old retiree who worked as a high school math teacher for 30 years. There's no way he was working as a senior sales associate for Marcus's company." "Oh my God," I whispered. "How many people has he done this to?" "Based on what I'm seeing here, at least 6. Possibly more. And here's the really sick part. Some of these victims might not even know yet. Mortgage payments often don't start for several months after closing, and if Marcus has been making the initial payments to keep everything quiet, the victims might not find out until the loans go into default." Jessica leaned forward, her expression serious. "Hallie, I need you to understand something. What we're looking at here isn't just a family dispute or a case of poor financial judgment. This is organized crime. Your brother is running what amounts to a criminal enterprise, and he's using innocent people's identities to fund his lifestyle. The weight of her words settled over me like a heavy blanket. I'd walked into this office thinking I was dealing with a personal betrayal. Now I was learning that I was part of something much bigger and much more sinister. "What do we do now?" I asked. "First, we're going to file a police report. This needs to be on record immediately. Then we're going to contact the FBI's Financial Crimes Division, because mortgage fraud involving multiple victims across state lines is a federal crime. And we're going to track down every single person Marcus has victimized and make sure they know what's happened to them." The police station was everything I'd expected. Fluorescent lights, uncomfortable plastic chairs, and the constant buzz of activity. Detective Rivera, who specialized in financial crimes, listened to my story with the kind of professional detachment that I found both comforting and unsettling. "Miss Richardson," he said when I finished, "I want you to know that what you're describing is more common than you might think. Family members who commit identity theft often get away with it for years because the victims trust them and don't think to check their credit reports regularly." He pulled out a thick folder from his desk drawer. "We've actually been investigating some irregularities in real estate transactions in this area for the past 6 months. Your brother's name has come up in connection with several suspicious mortgage applications." My stomach dropped. "You've been investigating Marcus?" "Not Marcus specifically, but the pattern of fraudulent applications coming through certain real estate companies. The problem is, we haven't been able to find any victims willing to come forward. Until now." Detective Rivera explained that in most identity theft cases involving family members, victims are reluctant to press charges because they don't want to send a relative to prison. But what many people don't realize, he said, is that by not reporting these crimes, they're allowing the perpetrator to continue victimizing other innocent people. He was right, and I knew it. If I stayed quiet to protect Marcus, how many other people would he steal from? How many other families would he destroy? "I want to press charges," I said firmly, "and I want to help you find the other victims." Detective Rivera smiled for the first time since I'd walked into his office. "That's exactly what I was hoping you'd say." Over the next 2 weeks, Jessica and Detective Rivera worked together to unravel the full extent of Marcus's scheme. What they found was even more shocking than we'd initially suspected. Marcus hadn't just been stealing identities for mortgage fraud. He'd also been using fake employment records to help unqualified buyers get approved for loans they couldn't afford. He would create fictional employees for Richardson Real Estate, complete with fake pay stubs and employment verification letters, and then use these fake identities to help real buyers who couldn't qualify for loans on their own. But here's where it gets really twisted. Marcus was charging these buyers under the table for his services. People who couldn't get approved for mortgages through legitimate channels would pay Marcus anywhere from $10,000 to $50,000 to create fake documentation that would help them get approved. So he was running 2 separate scams simultaneously. Jessica explained to me over coffee one afternoon. He was stealing real people's identities to get mortgages for himself and his associates. And he was also creating fake identities to help unqualified buyers get mortgages they couldn't afford. It's like a one-man mortgage fraud factory. The more we learned, the sicker I felt. This wasn't just about my $647,000 mortgage anymore. This was about dozens of people whose lives had been affected by Marcus's greed. Detective Rivera had managed to identify and contact several of the victims. There was David Chen, the retired math teacher whose identity had been used to secure a $520,000 mortgage on a house he'd never seen. There was Maria Santos, A single mother who discovered that someone had used her name to buy a luxury condo while she was working two jobs just to pay rent on her one-bedroom apartment. There was Robert Kim, an elderly man who found out that his excellent credit had been used to finance a house flip that went bankrupt, leaving him responsible for a $380,000 debt. Each story was heartbreaking in its own way, but they all shared the same elements. Marcus had identified people with good credit and stable employment, gathered their personal information through various means, and then used their identities to secure mortgages that enriched him while destroying their financial futures. But the most shocking discovery came when Detective Rivera called me on a Thursday afternoon with news that made my blood run cold. "Hallie, I need you to sit down for this," he said. "We've been digging deeper into Marcus's activities, and we found something that directly involves your family." "What do you mean?" "Do you remember your Aunt Linda? Your father's sister?" "Of course. She lives in Sacramento. She's been retired for about 5 years now. According to our investigation, someone used Linda's identity to secure a $290,000 mortgage on a property in Eugene 18 months ago. The employment verification came from Richardson Real Estate, listing her as a part-time administrative assistant. I felt like I was going to be sick. Linda? Marcus stole from Linda too? It gets worse. Hallie, the property that was purchased with Linda's identity is currently being rented out as an Airbnb. The rental income is going directly into Marcus's business account. My own brother hadn't just stolen from me. He'd been systematically stealing from our entire extended family, using their identities to build his real estate empire while they remained completely unaware. "Have you told Linda yet?" I asked. "We wanted to talk to you first. We thought it might be easier coming from a family member." I called Linda that evening, and the conversation was one of the most difficult of my life. Linda had always been the sweetest, most trusting person in our family. She baked cookies for every holiday, remembered everyone's birthday, and would give you the shirt off her back if you needed it. "Hallie, honey, I don't understand," she said when I explained what Marcus had done. "Why would Marcus need to use my name for anything? And what's this about a house in Eugene?" When I told her about the $290,000 mortgage and the Airbnb income, Linda was quiet for so long that I thought the call had been disconnected. "Linda, are you still there?" "I'm here," she said softly. I can't believe this. Marcus used to call me every few months just to check in, to see how I was doing. He seemed so caring, so concerned about my welfare. Was he just gathering information to steal from me?" The pain in her voice was heartbreaking. "I'm so sorry, Linda. I had no idea this was happening." "Oh, sweetheart, this isn't your fault. If anything, you're the hero here for figuring this out and stopping him." But I didn't feel like a hero. I felt like I'd failed to protect the people I loved most. The investigation continued to expand. Detective Rivera and his team discovered that Marcus had victimized at least 12 people, stealing a combined total of over $15 million in fraudulent mortgages. Some of the victims were family members. Some were former clients. And some were complete strangers whose personal information Marcus had obtained through data breaches or social engineering. But perhaps the most disturbing discovery was that Sarah had been actively involved in the scheme from the beginning. It wasn't just that she'd known about the fraud, she'd been helping to execute it. We found email exchanges between Marcus and Sarah discussing which family members had the best credit scores. Detective Rivera told me, "Sarah was the one who suggested using Linda's identity for the Eugene property. She'd been doing research on your extended family, finding out who would be the most valuable targets." I thought about all those family dinners where Sarah had been so warm and welcoming, asking everyone about their jobs, their finances, their plans for the future. I'd thought she was just being friendly, making conversation. Now I realized she'd been conducting reconnaissance. The betrayal went so much deeper than I'd initially understood. This wasn't just about Marcus making a bad decision or taking advantage of an opportunity. This was about two people who had spent years systematically planning to exploit and destroy their own family members for financial gain. But the investigation also revealed something that gave me hope. Despite Marcus's best efforts to cover his tracks, he'd made mistakes. Lots of them. He'd used the same computer to create fake documents for multiple victims. He'd deposited rental income from the fraudulent properties into accounts that could be traced back to him. He'd even bragged about his successful real estate investments on social media, posting photos of properties that had been purchased with stolen identities. The evidence against Marcus is overwhelming, Jessica told me. There's no way he's going to be able to talk his way out of this. The question now is whether he's going to cooperate with the investigation or try to fight it. We got our answer the following week when Detective Rivera called to tell me that Marcus and Sarah had been arrested. They'd been charged with multiple counts of identity theft, mortgage fraud, wire fraud, and conspiracy. The FBI had raided their house, the house that I'd been living in, the house that had been purchased with my stolen identity, and seized computers, financial records, and boxes of fake documents. They're both in custody, Detective Rivera said. Marcus is claiming that he was just trying to help family members who couldn't qualify for mortgages on their own. Sarah is claiming she didn't know anything about the fraud, that Marcus told her the mortgages were legitimate. Do you believe them? Not for a second. The evidence shows clear premeditation and coordination between both of them. This wasn't a spur-of-the-moment decision or a misguided attempt to help family. This was a carefully planned criminal enterprise designed to enrich themselves at the expense of innocent people. As I hung up the phone, I felt a mixture of relief and sadness that I'd never experienced before. Relief that Marcus and Sarah were finally facing consequences for what they'd done. Sadness that my family would never be the same again. But there was also something else. A sense of empowerment that I hadn't felt in years. For the first time since my divorce, I felt like I was in control of my own life. I wasn't a victim anymore. I was a survivor who had fought back and won. The legal battle was far from over, but I knew that no matter what happened next, I would never again allow anyone to steal my identity, my dignity, or my future. And I was going to make sure that every single person Marcus had victimized got the justice they deserved. The courthouse steps felt like they were made of concrete and broken dreams as I walked up them on the morning of Marcus and Sarah's arraignment. It had been 6 weeks since their arrest, and in that time, my entire world had been turned upside down in ways I never could have imagined. Jessica walked beside me, carrying a briefcase full of evidence that would help put my brother and sister-in-law behind bars. Behind us. Detective Rivera was accompanied by 3 other victims who had decided to attend the hearing: David Chen, Maria Santos, and my Aunt Linda. Each of them had a story that would make you sick to your stomach, and each of them deserved justice. But as we approached the courthouse entrance, I saw something that made my blood run cold. Standing near the entrance, surrounded by what looked like expensive lawyers in $1,000 suits, were my parents. I hadn't spoken to my mother or father since the night I'd called to tell them about Marcus's arrest. That conversation had been one of the most painful of my life. "Hallie, honey," my mother had said, her voice strained and tired. "Surely there's been some kind of misunderstanding. Marcus would never do something like this intentionally." "Mom, there's no misunderstanding. The FBI has evidence. Marcus stole my identity and the identities of at least 11 other people, including Aunt Linda. He stole over $15 million. But sweetheart," my father had interjected, Marcus says this is all just a big accounting error. He says he was trying to help people who couldn't get mortgages on their own, and that he always intended to pay everything back. The fact that my parents were willing to believe Marcus's lies, even in the face of overwhelming evidence, had been almost as devastating as the original betrayal. But seeing them here now, clearly supporting Marcus instead of his victims, felt like being stabbed all over again. As we walked past them toward the courthouse entrance, my mother reached out and grabbed my arm. "Hallie, please," she whispered urgently. "Can't we settle this privately? As a family? Marcus has agreed to pay back every penny. There's no need to destroy his life over this." I stopped and looked at her, really looked at her, and for the first time in my life, I saw my mother clearly. She wasn't the strong, principled woman I'd always thought she was. She was someone who valued family loyalty over justice, someone who would rather protect a criminal than stand up for his victims. "Mom," I said quietly, "Marcus didn't just steal from me. He stole from Linda. He stole from a retired math teacher who's now afraid he's going to lose his house. He stole from a single mother who's working 2 jobs just to survive. This isn't about family anymore. This is about justice." My mother's face crumpled. "But he's your brother, Hallie. He's my son. How can you do this to him?" "I'm not doing anything to him," I replied. "He did this to himself." Inside the courtroom, I sat in the front row with the other victims, watching as Marcus and Sarah were led in wearing orange jumpsuits and handcuffs. Marcus looked pale and thin, like he'd lost weight since his arrest. Sarah kept her eyes down, refusing to look at any of us. When the judge asked them to enter their pleas, both Marcus and Sarah's lawyers stood up and said, "Not guilty, Your Honor." It was exactly what I'd expected, but it still felt like another slap in the face, even now. Even with all the evidence against them, they were going to continue lying. But then something happened that I hadn't expected. The prosecutor, a sharp-looking woman named Amanda Walsh, stood up and addressed the court. "Your Honor, the state would like to present additional evidence that has come to light since the original charges were filed." She gestured to an FBI agent who had been sitting in the back of the courtroom. He walked forward carrying a laptop and what looked like several boxes of documents. "Agent Martinez," Prosecutor Walsh said, "please tell the court what your investigation has uncovered in the past 6 weeks." Agent Martinez cleared his throat. "Your Honor, our investigation has revealed that the defendants were part of a much larger criminal network. We have evidence that Marcus Richardson was not just stealing identities for personal gain, but was also selling stolen personal information to other criminal organizations." I felt my heart stop. This was the first I was hearing about any of this. Agent Martinez continued, "We found encrypted files on the defendants' computers containing personal information of over 200 individuals, social security numbers, birth dates, employment records, and credit reports. We believe the defendants were part of an identity theft ring that spans multiple states and has caused damages in excess of $15 million. The courtroom erupted in whispers and gasps. I turned to look at Jessica, who looked as shocked as I felt. This had gone from a case about mortgage fraud to something much bigger and much more sinister. "Furthermore," Agent Martinez said, "we have evidence that the defendants were planning to flee the country. We found plane tickets to a non-extradition country, along with fake passports and over $400,000 in cash hidden in their home." I felt like the floor had disappeared beneath me. My brother hadn't just been stealing from family members and clients. He'd been part of an international criminal organization, and he'd been planning to disappear with stolen money, leaving all of his victims to deal with the financial devastation he'd caused. Judge Harrison, who had been listening with the increasingly stern expression, addressed Marcus and Sarah directly. Mr. and Mrs. Richardson, in light of this new evidence, I am denying bail and ordering you to be held in custody until trial. The court considers you both to be flight risks and a danger to the community. As the bailiffs led Marcus and Sarah away, Marcus turned and looked directly at me for the first time since the hearing had begun. The expression on his face wasn't remorse or shame. It was pure, cold hatred. He mouthed the words, "This is your fault," before disappearing through the side door. After the hearing, the victims and their families gathered in a conference room with Prosecutor Walsh and Agent Martinez to discuss what would happen next. "I want you all to understand," Prosecutor Walsh began, "that this case has become much more complex than we initially anticipated. We're now dealing with federal charges that could result in decades of prison time for both defendants." David Chen, the retired math teacher, raised his hand. "What about our mortgages? What about the money that was stolen from us?" "That's a great question." Prosecutor Walsh replied, "The good news is that the federal government has a victim compensation program for cases like this. Additionally, we're working to seize all of the defendants' assets, including the properties that were purchased with stolen identities. Those assets will be liquidated and the proceeds will be distributed to the victims." Maria Santos, the single mother, spoke up. "How long will this process take? I'm already 3 months behind on my rent because of the damage to my credit from this mortgage that I never applied for." Agent Martinez leaned forward. "Ms. Santos, I want you to know that the FBI has a victim services division that can help you with immediate financial assistance while we work through the legal process. We can also help you get your credit reports corrected and provide documentation to landlords and creditors showing that you were a victim of identity theft." As the meeting continued, I found myself feeling a mixture of emotions I couldn't quite sort through. There was relief that Marcus and Sarah were going to face serious consequences for what they'd done. There was satisfaction that the other victims were going to get help and compensation. But there was also a deep sadness about what this meant for my family. After the meeting, Aunt Linda pulled me aside. She looked tired and older than I'd ever seen her. "Hallie," she said softly, "I want you to know how proud I am of you for coming forward about this. If you hadn't been brave enough to report what Marcus did, I and all these other people would still be victims without even knowing it. I'm so sorry this happened to you. Linda, I should have figured it out sooner." "Nonsense," she said firmly. "You were a victim too. Honey, don't you dare blame yourself for what Marcus chose to do." She paused, looking out the window at the courthouse steps where my parents were still standing with Marcus's lawyers. "I've been thinking a lot about our family lately," Linda continued, "about how we always protected Marcus, always made excuses for him, always bailed him out when he got into trouble. I think we enabled this behavior by never holding him accountable for his actions." She was right, and we both knew it. Marcus had been getting away with smaller betrayals and irresponsible behavior for years, and our family had always covered for him. We'd taught him that there were no real consequences for his actions. That family loyalty trumped everything else, including honesty and basic decency. "Things are going to be different now," I said. "I'm not going to be the family enabler anymore." Linda smiled sadly. "I think that's going to be hard for your parents to accept. They're still in denial about who Marcus really is." Over the next several months, as the case made its way through the legal system, I learned more disturbing details about the scope of Marcus's criminal activities. The FBI's investigation revealed that he had been part of a sophisticated identity theft network that included real estate agents, mortgage brokers, and even some bank employees in 5 different states. The network had developed a system for identifying potential victims with excellent credit scores and stable employment. They would gather personal information through various means: data breaches, social engineering, even dumpster diving for discarded financial documents. Then they would use that information to create fake loan applications and supporting documentation. Marcus's role in the network had been to provide employment verification for loan applications. His real estate company served as a front, allowing him to create fake employment records for people who didn't actually work for him. He was paid anywhere from $5,000 to $15,000 for each fake employment verification he provided. But Marcus had gotten greedy. Instead of just providing employment verification for other people's schemes, he had started stealing identities himself to secure mortgages for properties he wanted to buy. That's where he made the mistake that led to his downfall. He got sloppy and started using family members and clients, people who were more likely to eventually discover what he'd done. The trial began 8 months after Marcus and Sarah's arrest. By that time, the victim count had grown to over 30 people across 5 states, with total damages exceeding $25 million. Jessica had prepared me for the possibility that I would need to testify, and when the day came, I was surprisingly calm. I had spent months preparing for this moment, months thinking about what I would say to the judge and jury about how Marcus's betrayal had affected my life. When Prosecutor Walsh called my name, I walked to the witness stand with my head held high. I looked out at the courtroom and saw the faces of other victims, people whose lives had been turned upside down by Marcus's greed. I saw FBI agents and prosecutors who had worked tirelessly to bring justice to this case. And yes, I saw my parents, sitting in the back row with expressions of disappointment and sadness. "Ms. Richardson," Prosecutor Walsh began, "please tell the jury about your relationship with the defendant, Marcus Richardson." "Marcus is my older brother," I said clearly. "Growing up, I looked up to him. I trusted him completely. When I was going through a difficult divorce, he offered me a place to stay in his home. I thought he was being generous and supportive." "Did you give Marcus permission to use your identity to obtain a mortgage?" "Absolutely not. I had no idea he had done this until I received a phone call from the mortgage company 6 months after the loan was approved." "How did you feel when you discovered what Marcus had done?" I paused, thinking about how to put into words the devastation I had felt. I felt betrayed in the deepest possible way. Marcus didn't just steal money from me. He stole my sense of security, my ability to trust people, my faith in family. He made me question everything I thought I knew about the people closest to me. The defense attorney, a sharp lawyer in an expensive suit, tried to paint Marcus as someone who had simply made poor business decisions while trying to help people who couldn't qualify for mortgages through legitimate channels. He suggested that Marcus had always intended to pay back the money and that the victims hadn't actually been harmed, since the mortgage payments had been kept current. But the evidence was overwhelming. The FBI had recorded phone conversations between Marcus and other members of the identity theft network. They had emails detailing the sale of stolen personal information. They had financial records showing that Marcus had made over $2 million from his criminal activities. When the defense attorney cross-examined me, he tried to suggest that I was motivated by revenge rather than justice. "Ms. Richardson," he said, "isn't it true that you were angry with your brother about unrelated family matters, and that you saw this mortgage issue as an opportunity to get back at him?" I locked eyes with Marcus, my voice steady as steel. "Sir, I would give anything for this to not be true. I would give anything to have my brother back, to have the person I thought he was actually exist. But I'm not going to stay silent and allow him to continue destroying innocent people's lives just because we share the same parents." The jury deliberated for less than 4 hours before returning with their verdict: guilty on all counts for both Marcus and Sarah. Judge Harrison sentenced Marcus to 15 years in federal prison and ordered him to pay full restitution to all victims. Sarah received 8 years and was also ordered to pay restitution. Both of them were banned from working in real estate or finance for life. As the sentences were read, I watched my parents in the back of the courtroom. My mother was crying quietly, and my father had his arm around her shoulders. I felt sorry for them. They had lost a son, even though that son had chosen his own path to destruction. But I also felt something unexpected washing over me, a deep, unshakable peace. After the sentencing, I walked outside into the bright sunshine and took a deep breath of fresh air. For the first time in over a year, I felt like I could breathe freely. The nightmare was finally over. Agent Martinez approached me on the courthouse steps. "Ms. Richardson, I want you to know that your courage in coming forward prevented this criminal network from victimizing dozens more people. You should be proud of what you've accomplished." "Thank you," I said. "But I didn't do this alone. None of this would have been possible without all the law enforcement officers and prosecutors who took this case seriously." Over the following months, the victim restitution process began. The federal government seized all of Marcus and Sarah's assets, including multiple properties, bank accounts, and even Sarah's jewelry collection. The house where I had lived as an unknowing victim was sold, and the proceeds were distributed among the victims according to how much they had been defrauded. I received a check for $647,000, the full amount of the mortgage that had been taken out in my name, but more importantly, my credit was completely restored, and I had the satisfaction of knowing that justice had been served. I used part of the restitution money to start a nonprofit organization called Identity Reclaimed, which provides support and resources to victims of family identity theft. It turns out that identity theft by family members is much more common than most people realize, and victims often face unique challenges because they're reluctant to report crimes committed by people they love. Through Identity Reclaimed, we've helped over 200 victims navigate the legal system, restore their credit, and rebuild their lives. We've also worked with law enforcement agencies to develop better procedures for investigating family identity theft cases. But perhaps most importantly, we've created a community where victims can share their stories without judgment and find the support they need to heal from the trauma of being betrayed by the people they trusted most. Now, 3 years after Marcus's sentencing, I can honestly say that I'm grateful for everything that happened, not because I enjoyed being victimized or seeing my family torn apart, but because the experience taught me who I really am and what I'm capable of. I learned that I'm stronger than I ever imagined. I learned that sometimes doing the right thing means making incredibly difficult choices. I learned that family loyalty should never come at the expense of justice. And I learned that it's possible to forgive someone while still holding them accountable for their actions. My relationship with my parents is still strained. They've never fully accepted that Marcus was truly guilty, and they still believe that I should have handled the situation within the family, rather than involving law enforcement. But I've made peace with that. I can't control how other people choose to see the world, but I can control how I respond to it. Today, I live in a small house that I bought with my own money, earned through my own hard work. I have a job that I love, working as a victim advocate with a local law enforcement agency. I have friends who value honesty and integrity, and I have a sense of purpose that comes from knowing that I've used my painful experience to help other people avoid or recover from similar situations. If you're listening to this story and you recognize yourself in it, if you've been victimized by someone you trusted, if you've discovered that a family member has stolen your identity, if you're struggling with whether to report a crime committed by someone you love, I want you to know that you're not alone. You deserve to have your identity protected. You deserve to be treated with honesty and respect, especially by the people who claim to love you, and you deserve justice, even if that justice comes at a personal cost. Don't let anyone convince you that family loyalty requires you to sacrifice your own well-being or to enable criminal behavior. Real love doesn't ask you to be a victim. Real family doesn't require you to stay silent about abuse. Your voice matters. Your experience matters. And your courage to speak up might be exactly what's needed to protect other innocent people from becoming victims themselves. Trust yourself. Stand up for yourself. And never, ever let anyone steal your identity, literally or figuratively. Because at the end of the day, the most important thing you own isn't your credit score or your bank account or your family name. It's your integrity, your dignity, and your right to live authentically as yourself. And those things are worth fighting for, no matter what it costs. Because the moment you stop fighting for yourself is the moment you let them win.